Okay, so tonight we're not in California, we're not in Guyana. We are in a town so small that if you blink driving through it on US 27 in 1931, you missed it. 100, 1,100 people, one main street, one drugstore, one movie theater that played whatever Hollywood mailed them 6 weeks after Hollywood was done with it. That's how they got their movies. Cornfields in every direction, flat all the way to the horizon. Nothing to really look at but sky. And this is where he was born. May 13th, 1931, in the middle of the Great Depression, in a town that didn't even have indoor plumbing in most of its houses yet. To a 31-year-old mother who had already told her friends out loud before she got pregnant that she was going to give birth to a man who would change the world. And his name was James Warren Jones. They called him Jimmy until he was old enough to stop them. And before I take you in there, I want to tell you what we're doing tonight because this episode is different from the last, I don't know how many I've done. And you should know this going in. Up until now, I have been circling Jim Jones. We did the Tammany Hall before we did Jim Jones because you needed to know what American political corruption looks like before you tried to understand him. At least I thought so. We did Guyana before we did Jonestown because I felt like we needed to know what country we were standing in before the people started dying in it. And we did the Klan, or actually, that's gonna be next. Sorry. We're gonna do the Klan in Indiana because I want you to know what state he came out of. And in all those episodes, I have kind of kept him off the table on purpose because every documentary about this man, a lot of them at least, opens up with his weird childhood, and a lot of them talk about this man who uses the weird childhood. I feel like almost to make you feel sorry for him, and I didn't want to do that before you knew the names of the people he killed, and now you know the names. So now I feel like we can do the childhood. Now we can sit in the barn with him. Now we can meet his mama and we can talk about Myrtle Kennedy. Because now I feel like when you hear what was done to him, you're not going to confuse that with sympathy for what he did to other people. I feel like you're going to hear both things at once, which is how I want you to hear this man for the rest of the series. And it's that this man's been playing pretend that he was a good person, that he's a prophet, pretending that he was God, pretending that he loved black people, pretending that he loved poor people, or even that he loved his wife. Pretend, all of it. And the pretend started in Indiana, Lynn, Indiana, before he could read, because his mother told him he was the Messiah, before he could tie his own shoes, and he believed her. And the rest of his life was a search for a stage big enough to prove her right. That is the thesis tonight. Everything he started became with that woman. Every cult leader move he made, every microphone he ever picked up, every black baby he ever paraded around in a stroller for a photo op, every hospital bed he would later push out of a colored ward into a whites only hallway in Indianapolis just to make a scene and to get his name in paper, every defector he would ever stalk into their own kitchen. Every single one of those moves leads back to Lynn, Indiana, and back to Miss Lynetta Putman Jones, and back to a barn, and back to the rock of an 8-year-old kid's hand. So we start with his mother, because everything starts with his mother. And I want to spend some real time here, because every retelling of the Jonestown story, not every, but a lot of them, not Stephanie Harlow's, for example, she does not do this. But a lot of them will skip Lynetta entirely or spend about 4 sentences on her and move on. And since I just said Stephanie Harlow, in the words of her, I forgot exactly how she says it, but you can't tell the rest of it if you don't tell the beginning. She says it way better than that, so go look at her stuff because she's awesome, and you probably already know her. But Miss Lynetta Putman, whew, she's so interesting. She was not a small town Indiana housewife. Instead, I want to call it like a piece of work, okay, in her own right. She was smart. She kind of look a little mischievous though. If you look at her picture, I ain't gonna lie, she look a little mischievous. She looked like she just did something she knew she wasn't supposed to. Um, but In this time in the 1930s, she was very resentful where she was because she felt trapped. She wore pants in 1930 in a town where women wore dresses. She smoked cigarettes in a public town where women did not smoke at all, and she cussed and she drank and she read books that the librarian would raise her eyebrows at. And Miss Lynetta, she was not interested in the Lord or in casseroles or in being anybody's wife, and she ended up married to a coffin broken World War I veterinarian, almost 20 years older than her, in a town she hated. She despised it. With a baby she had not exactly planned, because that was the life that was available to her, and she resented every single hour of it. Miss Lynetta Putman Jones actually wanted to be an anthropologist. And I think that's interesting. She wanted to study human civilizations and to travel to remote parts of the world and to write about people and publish. This was her dream. And she did not get that dream. She got Lynn, Indiana, a sick husband, and a strange, intense son, a factory job, a kitchen that needed cleaning, and the rest of her life, she was bitter about it. And she did not hide that bitterness from her child. Now, here is the story she told for the rest of her life. She told it to him, to his church. She eventually told it to reporters in the 1970s on the record with her name attached to it. But she said that before he was born, she had a vision. And in the vision, her dead mother came to her, stood at the foot of her bed, and her dead mother said, "You will give birth to a son, and he will right the wrongs of the world." I don't know why I said it like that, but that's just how I imagine it. So Lynetta Jones, who did not believe in God, who thought organized religion was for the weak, she would mock the Pentecostal women down the street for speaking in tongues. She would tell anyone who would listen that she received a supernatural prophecy from a ghost about the cosmic destiny of her unborn son. And then she tells this story to her son repeatedly from the time he was old enough to understand words. She didn't say, "Oh, baby, you're special, sweetie. Go finish your peas." No, she said, "I had a vision before you came out of my body, and your grandmother came back from the dead to tell me about you. And she said, you are the one who's going to fix what's broken on this planet, and the rest of the people are just not like you. The rest of the people in this town do not understand what you are, but I do. I knew before you got here, you are the Messiah." She handed him a job before he could tie his own shoes. And the job is supposed to be the Messiah. Like, and I guess I gotta be careful here because I don't want to do the thing where we blame the mother for the man, okay? Okay, plenty of mothers have grandiose dreams for their sons, and the sons turn out to be insurance adjusters, not cult leaders, okay? Lynetta did not pull the trigger. Lynetta was not in Jonestown. She died. Um, and she didn't kill anybody, but she planted something in that little boy. And the something she planted was the belief that ordinary life was not for him. The belief that the rest of you exists, all of us, we all existed, only as a supporting cast in the story about him. The belief that love is something you receive when you perform correctly, and that performance is the entire job of being a person. And you can do that to a kid. And once it's in there, I think it's very hard to get out. And honestly, in Lynetta's case, I don't think she wanted it to come out. I think she wanted him to believe it. Because if her son was the Messiah, then her life she felt like was ruined had meaning. Then she had not wasted her one and only adulthood in Lynn, Indiana, married to a coughing old man. Instead, it would make her feel like she had been chosen, that she was the vessel, that she was the prophet's mother, that she was Mary, basically, that she married. And if he ever stopped being special, then that meant she would stop being special too. So I think she made sure she never stopped. And then can we talk about the Cherokee law? Because she told him over and over that they had Cherokee blood, that her grandmother was actually a full-blooded Cherokee woman, and that Jim Jones was part Native American and therefore connected to a kind of mystical American suffering that the white kids around him did not have access to. The lie detected it was a lie. Why you always lying? There was no Cherokee ancestor in the Putnam family tree that anyone has been able to find. Not in the census records, not in the family Bible, nowhere. This is just family folklore of the same exact kind that the millions of Americans, white Americans, tell themselves, okay? And Lynetta, she knew it was thin, but she repeated it anyway because it made her son special. And making her son special was the project of her life. And making herself, by extension, special was the project underneath that project, is what I believe. But I want you to hold that lie in your hand, because Cherokee blood, that lie is going to follow him into adulthood, and he's going to use that lie on every black congregation he ever stands in front of. Reminder: 45% of People's Temple were black women. And so he is going to use this, okay? And he's going to use this lie in San Francisco in the 1970s when he is recruiting children and grandchildren of the Great Migration, and he needs a reason that he's qualified to lead them. He's going to say with such a straight face, I'm not really white. I have native blood. I'm one of you. Honestly, he actually says he's black and a decent amount of stuff too. He just said, hey, I'm a Negro too. What? Says, who said that? My mama. But yeah, like, this is what he learned from her before he was even 6, okay? Like, it's just insane. And he would just really say to people that he has native blood, that he's one of them. There's a system that hurt your people, hurt my people too. And the black grandmothers who gave them their pension checks, they believed him. And there's another thing about Lynetta, and it's just, I don't know. So she also had a rule, and the rule was that Jimmy could not enter the house if she was not home. He could not let himself in. He couldn't wait inside. He couldn't even use the bath. He couldn't use the potty. He could not even get some water, and he couldn't even sit at the kitchen table and do homework. If she was at work and he came home from school, he had to wait outside on the porch, in the yard, in the rain if it was raining, in the snow if it was snowing, until she came home. And I don't know. I feel like that's not a rule. I feel like that's a message that this house is not yours, that you exist in my discretion, that you're not a member of this household, that you're a guest who's not been invited in yet. Because I can get into my neighbor's house, and like, I wouldn't just be there if he's not home just to be there. But like, if there's a reason I need to be there, I could be there. This was Jim Jones' own house. My neighbor's house not my house, obviously. So it's like that's a little insane to me. Like, basically what I'm saying is that, like, a lot of us have other people's homes that aren't even our homes, that can feel like home to us, that we could enter if they're not there, and they're not even our family, and we don't even live in those homes, and he lived in this home. I don't know. I feel like that kind of message teaches a child that love is conditional, and that home is almost something you have to earn entry to enter into, and that the way you earn entry is by being important enough to be let inside. And I think that wound is one he's going to spend the rest of his life trying to close, by building bigger and bigger houses with more and more locks on the doors and more people inside them, until eventually he basically builds a house in the jungle that is 3,800 acres wide with a fence around it and armed guards at the gate. And he's the one who decides who comes in and who comes out. And nobody is ever going to make him stand on a porch in the rain again. And that's Jonestown. Jonestown, I think, is the house Lynetta would not let him into, just bigger. All right, let me go off for, I got a lot more to talk about. James Thurman Jones, the father, the ghost in the chair. So let's talk about the father. World War I vet, came home from the trenches in France. He had a lungs full of mustard gas and a disability check, and that was pretty much it. He was 20 years older than Lynetta, and he could not work a full day because he could not even really breathe a full breath. He spent most of his son's childhood sitting on the porch, very quiet, drinking when there was anything to drink, and smoking when there was anything to smoke, and then just coughing. And Jim didn't have a relationship with his father in the way that you would recognize a father-son relationship. Instead, it was more like he had a roommate, a very quiet, ill, older man who lived in his house. They didn't talk, play catch. They didn't do anything. Jim Sr. was functionally kind of like furniture in his own home. And there are some Klan rumors, but a lot of them have been uh, denounced. Like, the Jonestown Institute has said um that this is absolutely, like there's no proof about it. But we're going to talk about Indiana and its history with the KKK. Unfortunately, putting together that slideshow made my stomach like churn, like literally, just like seeing like the white hoods, and it's just like so terrifying to just like think about if you had been born in that time frame. Like you could just be hunted just because you're black. Like that's just insane. And like I have family, not even like super super distant, like from my grandma on, who have been like hurt by them. So very like I don't know, to like be a kid and like to just hear these like situations like from some people like firsthand of like what they remember seeing and people dying. Like that's just ah, it's just like how many black people like live like knowing that they survived when some like when there like there was no difference like with both, but like you're the one who like lived and you had to watch like someone like die like that. Like it's just so many emotions it brings up. Like I don't even know. That's gonna be a difficult one for me to like to do, but it will be the next one, I guess. I'm not that excited about it, to be honest with you. Um, I'm ready to get past that one. And anyway, moving along. But the short version is that Indiana in the 1920s, a decade before Jim Jones was born, it actually was the biggest Klan state in America. Not Alabama, not Mississippi, Indiana. 1 in 3 native-born white men in the state had been actually due-paying members of the Klan. The governor was half the legislator, the mayor. This is basically the political water that Jim Jones was born into in 1931, 6 years after the organization officially collapsed, but 0 years after the worldview had taken off the robe and put on a regular suit. And the question of whether Jim Sr. himself was Klan is not as clean as some of the retellings. Some people in Lynn said he was. Some said that he was Klan adjacent. Some said that he was just a quiet racist of the regular Indiana type who agreed with the programs but never paid the dues. But what is not in dispute and what is documented in interviews multiple Lynn residents gave to biographers is that Jim Sr. would not allow black visitors in the family home, and that the teenager Jim had brought home a black classmate one afternoon, and his father turned the friend away at the door, and the teenage Jim, in response, stopped speaking to his father for years. And he didn't break the silence till his father was dying, and some accounts say he did not even break it then. So I think that's interesting. I think we should mark that fight because that's the first time in the recorded years of Jim Jones that he uses a black person as a weapon against a white authority figure. He's 14, 15 years old. He brings the black classmate home. His father turns the boy away, and Jim Jr. picks the black boy and goes silent on his father for the rest of his father's life. And I think that instinct of I'm going to side with the black person against the white person and make sure everyone sees me do it. And the more it costs me publicly, the more credit I get. I think this is not an instinct that he developed in Annapolis in the 1950s. I think he had that instinct at 15. And he had it because his father was the easiest white authority figure he in the world to humiliate, right? Isn't he? Sick, old, broke, couldn't chase him out, couldn't punish him. He could only really sit there and cough while his son walked past him to go meet his black friend at the soda fountain. And I think that's interesting because for the next 40 years of his life, they're really just him doing the same move on bigger and bigger fathers. The Methodist Church is a father. He humiliates it and walks out. The Disciples of Christ he joined is a father. He uses it and walks out. America itself is almost like the last father, right? He literally leaves America and goes to Guyana and takes everybody with him when he walks out on that one. So now let's talk about Miss Myrtle Kennedy, third adult. And one I want to be very careful with because she's the only person in this entire episode who actually loved this child and had no ulterior motive for doing it besides wanting his soul to go to Christ. I mean, and I guess it's not really ulterior motive, but it kind of can be sometimes. But her name was Myrtle Kennedy and she lived down the street. She was a Pentecostal woman. I'm honestly not amazingly confident this picture is actually her, to be honest with you. But it said Myrtle Kennedy, so we're gonna go with it. There's another picture of them of Myrtle and Kennedy like later in life, actually, before he goes to Guyana, because he actually writes her a lot. Let me talk about it. Okay, so Myrtle Kennedy, she lived down the street. She was a Pentecostal woman. She belonged to the Church of Nazarene, and this is a holiness denomination that really runs hot. In the Pentecostal service, They have very physical worship. People speak in tongues and they fall out in the spirit and they get healed. And the preacher paces and the preacher yells and the preacher whispers and the preacher cries and the whole room kind of moves together, and the energy in the room is for the people in the room, for them, proof that God is there. And this is the kind of church that Myrtle Kennedy took little Jimmy Jones to repeatedly, starting when he was very small, because Lynetta and his daddy, they were not churchgoers. And this is a town where like everybody belonged to a church. Lynetta thought organized religion was for the weak, and Jim Sr., he was too sick to walk anywhere. And Myrtle, she basically looked at this like little strange, intense, lonely little boy next door who's not allowed in his own house when his mother was at work. And she does what a good neighbor does. She opens her door. She puts a cookie in his hand. She sits with him at her kitchen table, and eventually she brings him to the pews. And I want you to understand what Myrtle's doing here, because she's not a villain at all. She was basically a kind woman in a small town who saw a neglected little boy, strange but neglected, and she fed him and talked to him and taught him to say the Lord's Prayer. Y'all know Jim would be walking around with like stray dogs following him, like a line of stray dogs just following him. So yeah, hella strange. You can come in, but them dogs have to stay outside. Their cats can come in, but that's Myrtle Kennedy, okay? And she sees this little neglected boy. She feeds him, she talks to him, she teaches him the Lord's Prayer, and she takes him to church because her own family went to church, and that's the only social life she had to offer him. And she wasn't grooming him as a cult leader. She was just being neighborly in the exact way that people in small towns in 1936 were neighborly. And in almost any other child, what she did would have been one of the best things that ever happened to him, right? It would have been the warm memory he carried for the rest of his life, the kind aunt down the street, the cookies, the church. Unfortunately, the problem wasn't Myrtle. The problem was the child that she was being kind to, a little monster in the future. Actually, a little monster now. Then, I mean. But Jimmy Jones did not experience Myrtle's kindness the way a normal child would have experienced it. Instead, he saw it as research. He sat in her pew week after week, and he watched what the preacher did to make the women cry, and what the preacher did to make the men reach into their pockets, and the moment in the service when the whole room tipped over and people started speaking in tongues and everybody felt it together. And he took notes in his head from age 5. And then Myrtle, because Myrtle was not doctrinally rigid, she started taking him other places too. And then he started kind of going on his own as well. No, actually, she was very. I think she was very dedicated to being Nazarene. I think Jim went on his own, and Jim started going to Methodist services and Quaker meetings and Catholic mass on the high holidays. And by the time he was 10 years old, he had basically seen a lot of different styles of Christian worship. That's the other thing. A lot of people just went to one church. They went to these churches. Their mama went, their daddy went. So it was like they were used to where they were going. But not Jim. He was like a buffet of churches. Like, I want to go everywhere. I want to see what y'all all doing. And he was learning what each one did differently. And he was learning what made each kind of crowd open up. He was learning the menu. And Myrtle Kennedy was kind of the first person who showed him a stage, and she didn't mean to. She thought she was saving a soul and being a neighbor, and that she was bringing a strange little boy into the love of Jesus. And what she actually did, without knowing it, without ever in her life intending to, was giving a future cult leader almost his first lab, the first room where he watched what work, and where he understood that a person standing in the right spot, saying the right words in the right cadence, can move every single person in the building. And another thing that's interesting is that for the rest of Jim's life, he talks about Myrtle in adulthood, interviews on People's Temple tapes, with real tenderness in his voice, of all the adults in his childhood. Myrtle is the only one he ever spoke about kindly. Not Lynetta, not Jim Sr., Myrtle. He named her by name on tape, decades later, as the woman who introduced him to Jesus. He sent her Christmas cards from California. He invited her to visit People's Temple in Indianapolis. She went one time. She sat in his pew. She watched him preach. Child, Myrtle went home and she ain't never come back. I don't know what she saw that day. Nobody does. Myrtle never said it, but I can just guess. I think she saw herself in him. I think she watched him work the room and she recognized the cadence of the preacher she had taken him to in 1938. And she recognized the way he was holding a silence after the altar call, the same way the tent revivalists did it in 1940. And I think she walked out understanding in a way that she could not articulate that he had been listening to those services as a worshiper, that he hadn't been, and that he had been studying them as an actor. And what she thought had been the love of God in his eyes when she sat next to her, when he sat next to her in the pews at 6 year old, had been something else the whole time. And I don't think she knew until the end of her life what she had been a part of. Because she did live long enough to see Jonestown on the news in 1978. She was in her 80s. And she told the reporter through tears that she loved him like a son. And I believe her. And I also believe that the love was the warmest room he ever stood in. And then what did he do? Like a sociopath, he turned it into source material because that's what he did with everything anybody was ever going to give to him. So by the time little Jimmy Jones was 8 years old and he had taken everything he learned from Myrtle Kennedy and built his own church. Did you hear me again? Let me say it again. By the time Jimmy Jones was 8 years old, he had taken everything he had learned from Myrtle Kennedy and built his own church. Yeah, I said 8. In a barn, on a property, or a neighbor's property, depending on which witness you ask. He cleared a space in this loft, and he sets up what the neighborhood kids later remember as an altar, because he brought candles and books and a Bible, and he starts holding services for the other children of Lynn, Indiana. He would recruit them. He would go door to door, 8 years old, and tell the kids on his street that there was going to be a service in the barn, and you need to come. And they came because, child, what else you gonna do? It was Lynn, Indiana in 1939. No televisions, no video games. There was one movie a week, and if you missed it, you missed it. And there's this intense kid down the road who talks like a grown-up preacher and has built a whole room and candles and a script. And you know what? This is gonna be some entertainment. Probably the best entertainment we're gonna have for a little bit. So let's go, okay? And so these kids get to the barn, and Jim is preaching, and he is preaching long sermons that the other kids are just like, I don't know what are we talking about. Jim's over here, he's preaching about Jesus in a way that imitated the cadence of the adult preachers that he watched with Myrtle. So Jim is over here like preaching about death a lot because death was already the subject he kept circling back to. And he also would hold funerals for dead animals that he would find in the road or in the woods. And I mean funerals for mice, birds, possums. He would recover the body, bring it to the barn, deliver the eulogy, and the other children of Lynn, Indiana would attend that service. And he didn't just preach, by the way. He demanded attendance. He kept track of who came and who did not. He got angry when kids skipped his service. And he confronted them at school on Monday and would guilt them. And he would be like, your soul's in danger if you don't come back next week. And he also had a roster, basically, like in his head, of who was a faithful member of his congregation and who was a defector at 8 years old. Isn't that so interesting? Because the pattern's already here, right? At 8 years old, before puberty, before high school, before any of the racial, political, theological content, he would eventually layer on top of it the core machinery of what he would do in Indianapolis, Ukiah, San Francisco, Jonestown was already running. The machinery is already running. If I build a room and I fill that room with people and I deliver the sermon, I'm the only one allowed to speak. I decide who comes in and who does not. I keep track of who is loyal and who is not. And death is a subject I keep coming back to because death is a subject that makes people sit still and listen. And that is Jonestown. The barn is Jonestown. In miniature form, the only difference is the scale and poison, but the content is already there. And every single one of those moves traces back to the porch he stood on when his mother locked the door, and the prophecy she handed him when she would not lock it, and the room Myrtle taught him to read the very first time he sat in it. And all roads lead back to Lynetta, don't they? All roads lead back to Lynetta. Now, not every kid in Lynn, Indiana, as we can imagine, was charmed by Jimmy Jones. Most of them weren't. A lot of kids thought he was weird. A lot of kids thought their parents are not going to be happy about this. Some kids, they really just want to go play basketball or baseball. They didn't want to sit through no 8-year-old sermon about a dead mouse. Now, one of these kids, by the accounts of multiple childhood acquaintances, later interviewed by biographers and by reporters in the late 1970s, refused to come to Jimmy's services repeatedly. This mofo would not sit in that barn, not be an audience. He would not play the role. And so one afternoon, Jimmy Jones, he's roughly 8 or 9, he picks up a rock and throws it at the back of this boy's head, and he literally splits his scalp open. And this is the first act of physical violence that's recorded of James Warren Jones. And the trigger for that violence is not hunger, fear, they're not fighting over a toy. No, the trigger for him being violent is that he refused to be an audience. Is that somebody said no to his show. And no to the show at 8 years old in a barn in Indiana, apparently he's grounds for assault. Right? And it's just so interesting because I want you to hold that image, like that rock in that hand on that afternoon on a dirt road in Lynn, Indiana, in 1939. Because I feel like that rock is going to hit Edith Roller 40 years later, the retired school teacher, remember her? Who keeps a diary in Jonestown and I forgot that I've not talked about this part. And I'm going to not talk about this part yet. No, maybe I am. No, I'm not. Something happens with Edith. And we'll get to that part later. Oh, I need to write it down. Okay, I wrote it down. But I just don't feel like Jim ever put the rock down. I just feel like he got better at throwing it. And, the boy he hit, he did survive and he grew up and he lived a long life in Indiana. And he told the story to anyone who'd ask. And according to one interviewer who spoke to him in the late 70s, he told him, without much surprise, that he was not shocked that the boy with the rock had become the man who killed people. And he said, "Yo, I've been seeing this crap coming." He said, "I've been seeing this crap coming since elementary school. What y'all talking about?" So let's get to his teenage years, because the teenage years go fast because not much happens in it that you don't already see the seed of. Lynette and Jim Sr., they separate when Jimmy's about 12. Lynetta takes Jim and moves him to Richmond, Indiana, which is the bigger town next door. And bigger basically just means 30,000 people instead of 1,000. So it's still flat, small Indiana, but more people, more churches, more kinds of people, more black people, notably, because Richmond had a black community that Lynn did not have. And for the very first time, Jimmy is going to a place that's not mainly white. And he does well in school, very well. He is intensely well read for his age. He's the kid who has read books, the ones that the teachers have not read. And he quotes things at adults. And he's the kid who can argue. And he's also the kid who will not stop arguing. And the teachers find him exhausting. And the other students find him strange. And he has very few friends. And the friends he does have describe him in adulthood as intense and demanding and needing to be in charge of every conversation. And at this time, he's also developing his politics. He's reading Stalin, and he is once MAO becomes available. Mayo, I can never remember how to pronounce that. In English translation, he starts reading him, and he's also reading Hitler, not in an improving way, but he's studying him because Hitler is the man who has just demonstrated on a global scale that you can move millions of people with the right speech in the right room. And Jimmy Johns, age 14 in the Richmond, Indiana Public Library, is taking notes for the technique. And I promise you, this is not exaggeration. Jim Jones himself in adult interviews admitted on record that he studied all of those people specifically as students of crowds. And he wasn't embarrassed about it. He thought it was evidence of his seriousness. He's like, at 15, me studying Hitler makes you see that I am serious. But yeah, so he's the one who brings the black friend home. The father turns the friend away. The silence between father and son begins. I'm not completely certain about that, actually. Now I'm thinking about it. But y'all get the point. Like, some of the stuff is very hard to like verify for sure, because we're talking about like the early 1930s. So we only get but so much. But That's Jones. So now he's 15, what we're talking about. And he needs a job. Lynetta's working at a factory job and the money is tight. And now Jim is old enough to contribute. And also, he wants out of the apartment because Lynetta is exhausting. Isn't that interesting? And Lynetta is overwhelming. And frankly, Lynetta is doing to him at 15 what she's been doing to him since he was 4, handing him a destiny and resenting him for not having achieved it yet. So Jim goes to Reed Memorial Hospital in Richmond, Indiana, and he applies for a job as a hospital orderly, and they hire him. It's so interesting. Like, picture him walking through the doors of that hospital for the first time. 15 years old, skinny. He has this dark hair. He's pale. He's intense. He's hungry to be looked at. And he's walking into a building full of people who are dying and full of pain and full of families gathered around beds praying and full of the exact emotional pitch that Myrtle Kennedy's churches had run at. Except now it's real. The crying's real. The fear's real. The death is real. And he is one of the people who's authorized to walk into those rooms. I think that's a big moment for him. Up until Reed Memorial, every stage he ever stood at or every stage he ever was with, he had to build himself. The barn, he had to clear out himself. The funerals, he had to find the bodies for himself. The congregation, he had to go door to door and recruit himself. But at Reed Memorial, the stage already exists and the people are already in it. And they're in their most vulnerable state. And all he has to do is walk through the door in a uniform and they'll listen to him because he's wearing the uniform. And that's a lesson he learns at 15. That authority is a costume. Get the costume, walk the room, and they'll hand you the rest. And he works there 3 years. He changes bed plans, carries linens, he moves bodies from rooms to the morgue, he talks to dying people, and he finds out that he's good at it. He talks to grieving families, and he finds out he's good at that too. And he watches the doctors, nurses, chaplains, and takes notes on all of them. And then, on that stage, 3 years later, a young nursing student was going to look up from the body she was assigned to prepare, and she was going to see him standing on the other side of the table. And the rest of her life was going to bend toward him. And her name was Marceline Baldwin. And by the time she finished bending, you know what happened. So, told you would meet what walked into Reed Memorial at 15 years old. And I did in one of my shorter episodes, yay. Because I don't want to talk about it that much. But yeah, I feel like I've told you what you need to know for the most part. We're gonna keep it real thin on this man. Okay. I think his whole life was pretend. Really. And the next episode we'll be talking about the Klan first, and then there's actually a bonus to the bonus. And we're gonna be talking about someone that the Klan affected and the lady that took him down. Her name is Madge. And then we'll get to Indiana. But Indiana, I think, is where the pretend goes professional. And in that episode, we'll meet Reverend Jim Jones, not Jimmy, not the boy, but the Reverend in the suit with the wife, a church in a city with a microphone and a radio show and a free restaurant and a youth choir and a phone in the office of every state senator in Indiana. And in that episode, we're going to watch him do the thing he learned how to do in the barn. Except now he's 31 years old and he's wearing the costume. And the room is the city of Indianapolis. And the move is Black integration. And he's going to sit down at whites only lunch counters with Black members of his congregation and refuse to leave. And he is going to literally physically push hospital beds of Black patients out of the color ward and into the whites only hallway of Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis just to cause a scene, just to get his name in the paper, just to make sure everybody sees him doing it. And he's going to adopt the first Black child legally adopted by a white family in the state of Indiana. And he is going to name that child James Warren Jones Jr. Because the only better thing than being the Messiah is having a Black son named after you to wheel out at press events. And every single one of those acts is going to be historically real. He did sit down at those counters. He did push those beds. He did adopt that child. The black families of Indianapolis who watched him do those things in 1956 and 1957, 1958 were not wrong about what they saw. They saw a white man standing in front of the bullets that should have hit them. They saw a white man with his face on the front page of the Negro newspaper with the headline that he was on the Human Relations Honor Roll. They saw somebody finally doing the thing, and they followed him by the thousands. And some of them followed him all the way to Guyana, and some of their grandchildren are in the ground right now. And that's what I want us all to kind of hold in our hands as we talk about this. Because again, as I want to keep saying, the work was real and the man was already a monster. And both of those things were true at the same time. And the people who joined him were not stupid or crazy or weak. They saw exactly what the hell he was doing, and they were right that nobody else was doing it. They were just wrong about who was sitting on top of it. And what was sitting on top of it? Sitting on top of it, Lynetta. Still, always, a little boy who was told he was a messiah before he could read, who figured out in a barn in 1939 that he could make people sit still if he got the right script in the right voice, who figured out in a hospital in 1946 that the costume gets you in the door, and who already figured out in Indianapolis in 1956 that Black America was a costume too, the biggest costume of all, the one nobody could take off of him, the one that would let you do anything, because by 1970s in San Francisco, nobody's ever going to suspect the man who marched with the NAACP of running a death camp. It is said about him by people who knew him well that no matter how many members he had, he always knew something about you. He would be inside your kitchen. You have no idea how he get in. Didn't it feel like a little bit like P. Diddy? He'd be making a sandwich, reciting some weird rehearsed monologue about, where have you been, sister? I've been worried about you. And it's also said about him that every defector was a personal blow that he could not let go. That if you tried to leave, he would find you, call your job, call your mother, show up at your door, and he would not stop. Because Lewis Thomas tried to leave him in the barn in 1939 and he wouldn't let him. And he's not let anybody leave the barn since. He's still that little boy, and the rock is still in his hand, and the door is still locked, and Lynetta is still on the other side of it, telling him he is the only one who matters. So the next main episode will be in Annapolis. Marceline at 20, the first Black members by name, the first church building, the Methodist hospital scene, Jim Jr. in his stroller, and the moment he decided that Indiana was too small for him and started looking at a map. You know, just as I'm closing, Myrtle Kennedy did not deserve what that little boy did with their kindness, you know? Lewis Thomas, too, he didn't deserve to get hit in the head with a rock at 8 years old. And of course, he grows up to be the kind of man who tells a story to a reporter and say, yep, that track, that's exactly the kind of boy he was. It's so interesting, but so sad all at the same time. Anyway, there you go. There you have it, folks. We're done talking about his childhood.